Welcome to our presentation of the paper Evolution Strategies as a Scalable Alternative to Reinforcement Learning from Tim Salimans et al. As the name might suggest, in this paper they discussed an attempt to use evolution strategies, we refer to them as ES, together with parallelization as an alternative to reinforcement learning. ES is a subset of black box optimization algorithms. As in other problems, parallelization splits the workload on different workers. The intrinsic motivation behind performing extensive research on natural ES stems mostly from the motivation of establishing a highly parallelizable methodology compared to the more common Q-learning and policy gradient RL approaches, while being able to compete with these on hard RL problems. So ES works, as the name might suggest, just like the evolution in natural life. The keywords in blue are the terms used in natural evolution. So we have a random initial population, which we check for a stop condition. And after that, we have the population of parameter vectors, which are in natural evolution genotypes, which we then mutate or perturb in our case, which we then evaluate on the objective value function, which is in real life the fitness. And this forms a new generation. So one cycle of this is in our case 8 iteration, or in real life it would be one generation. And yeah, so in more detail, black box optimization algorithms denote optimization algorithms which don't provide any insight into the gradient nor the approximation function itself. As mentioned earlier, this approach in the paper is based on concepts of natural evolution strategies. It is denoted as a heuristic search procedure inspired by natural evolution of population found in nature. In contrast to policy-based gradient methods, ES rely on smoothing in the parameter space instead of the action space. So this is a short sketch of the algorithm or of the architecture of it. So here we have the learning rate, an isotropic multivariate Gaussian, the policy parameters, and a random seed. So each worker has basically two tasks. First, he has to mutate or to perform mutations by making local samplings of feeder I, and then you have to play a full generation. And yeah, after they finished with the generation, they choose the best Fi. They do this to reconstruct the mutation on feeder T+1. And note that it's not just one Fi, it can be multiple Fis. So again, in more detail, the algorithm works highly parallelized. Before the training, all workers are initialized with a common random seed and population parameters. Then they operate independently in parallel on full training episodes. And after each completed episode cycle, the workers only need to synchronize their accumulated episode reward, which are used to mutant new genotypes for the next training episode. In this context, the stochastic objective may be interpreted as a Gaussian blurred variation of the original objective function. The accumulated episode reward are only comprised of single scalar values, which are sufficient to agree on a parameter upgrade. The perturbed genotypes of the best performing worker are used as a basis for mutations in the following generation. Since the algorithm does not require value function approximations, no gradient need to be communicated. In comparison to other RL architectures, multiple iterations are needed for the value function estimate to catch up if the policy changes drastically. So this led to some notable findings. First, we have a better exploration behavior. Next, the computational burden goes way down because we do not require approximations and backprop. We can use ES as robust training method, see the fixed hyperparameters over all Atari, Mucho core games. It is invariant to the action frequency, i.e. different frame skip values have hardly any impact. It is robust. It has robust behavior with respect to delayed rewards, so it has a high tolerance dealing with long time horizons. It is robust to distribution of rewards, so it has no problem with sparse versus dense rewards. It has a linear distribution scaling for extremely high number of workers due to minimum communication overhead. And the parallelization is really powerful. In one experiment, it was possible to solve 3D humanoid in 10 minutes. The downsides are that on the one hand, we require much more data. It is roughly about 3 to 10 times as much compared to policy-based gradient methods. And on the other hand, the reparameterization optimization is indispensable for training consistency. Now my colleague Philip will continue with the conclusion and a more in-depth discussion of the findings.
We conclude that compared to other recent research concerning evolution strategies, the paper demonstrates a successful approach which is capable of learning well-known hard reinforcement learning problems. This aspect has played a decisive role in the comparatively muted interest and gradual adoption of evolution strategies compared to the well-respected and more commonly used counterparts, namely policy gradient methods and Q-learning. Another key finding is that the specific approach to parallelization used in this paper comes with extremely little communication overhead. Thus, the described methodology scales linearly with the number of workers. Using a representative hardware reinforcement learning problem, the Mochoko 3D humanoid task, the authors demonstrate that indeed, linear scaling can be reached using an extremely high number of 1,440 workers. Efficient scaling to massively distributed cloud-based infrastructures depicts an invaluable characteristic to tackle hard reinforcement learning problems. Furthermore, the described methodology denotes an attractive choice. Whenever no good value function estimates are available, actions have long-lasting effects, and the effective number of time steps is very long. Regarding future work, the authors intend to apply the same approach to problems with long time horizons and challenging reward mechanisms. These additional investigations might bear substantial new applications, since finding suitable reward methods denotes a typical problem in hard reinforcement learning problems. Another outlook is depicted by extending the usage of low-precision tensor operations to future evolution strategy algorithms, making better use of efficient scaling towards combining the presented evolution strategy approach with low-precision hardware could result in significant training performance gains in optimized future methodologies. Concerning the conducted study, we would like to impose some open questions. Firstly, the ability to solve some well-known hard reinforcement learning problems has been clearly demonstrated. We wonder whether a fine-tuned variation of the proposed methodology can be successfully applied to the most challenging class of reinforcement problems known today. For instance, AlphaGo or AlphaStar. Evolution strategy guidance. Can known evolution approaches, for instance, survival of the fittest, here, taken from Charles Darwin directly, taken or inspired by nature, be applied to this proposed methodology of natural evolution strategies in order to further improve reliability, but more importantly, to improve algorithm convergence massively? In its current state, mutations are solely based on variations of inducing stochastically distributed random noise and relying on reparameterization techniques in order to guarantee reliability. In nature, organisms evolve by mutation based on their survival needs. For instance, a predator will include growing large claws over the course of 20 to 30 generations. If it starts to hunt larger prey on a regular basis, it's a direct evolutionary response, rather than randomly trying out mutations to find out which ones succeed better than others and thus should be evolved in future generations. Thirdly, could the gigantic yearly growth concerning data stored in large distributed databases, for instance Google Cloud, and better data augmentation techniques circumvent the need for even larger amounts of data when using natural evolution strategies? And finally, we ask ourselves, were the principles similar to neural architecture search? For instance, Google Auto machine learning could be applied to find adequate reparameterization for a given reinforcement learning problem. We denote this as ESRS, which is an acronym that stands for Evolution Strategies Reparameterization Search. Besides, we'd like to shed some light on the key aspects which caught our personal interest the most. Firstly, the method is heavily inspired by concepts found in nature, while not taking full advantage of all successful evolution strategies present there. Secondly, finding an efficient method which scales linearly in massively distributed environments is of utter importance to pave the way for solving the most challenging reinforcement problems in the future. Thirdly, the trade-off between only requiring about 1/3 of the overall computation on the one hand, but between 3 to 10 times as much data on the other hand, enforces different constraints, but also offers additional options compared to policy-gradient methods and Q-learning. Fourthly, as has been shown, natural evolution strategies can deal with massively delayed rewards and long time horizons. Thus, extremely complex future reinforcement learning problems could potentially be solved following this approach, for which we fail to find adequate neural network architectures for the respective value function approximations. While other algorithms require us to find suitable learning representations encoded in the respective network architectures, natural evolution strategies evolved over very long time horizons will yield results as long as reparameterization is done properly, and thus the exploration phase is adequate due to not being constrained into the same paths when only relying on stochastically sampled imposed noise in order to create new mutations. Lastly, wide adoption of common reinforcement learning problems, for instance DQN, solving high-demanding reinforcement learning problems is heavily hampered due to the associated insurmountable computational burden. Most modern algorithms are based on a variation of gradient descent optimization. Thus, computation is mainly focused on efficient hardware implementation performing matrix operations. The industry is heavily moving towards more specialized machine learning hardware, namely TPUs, which stands for tensor processing units, and other even more specialized hardware equipment. This current industry trend limits access to specialized hardware to only research labs and big industry players. Smaller companies and individuals might be entirely excluded from contributing actively. Since evolution strategies don't require backpropagation, more readily available general purpose hardware, for instance, multi-core CPUs, might be efficiently used at some point in the future. Finally, even though the findings of the paper sound quite promising, we feel that better approaches are needed for evolution strategies to become the viable go-to solution for the majority of reinforcement learning problems. They are still restricted in some key areas. For instance, the necessity of using adequate problem-specific reparameterization and the extremely high data requirements. Thank you for your attention.